fell asleep. Adam fell asleep. God took his rib. God took his rib. He made a woman. He made a woman. Adam gets a helper. Adam gets a helper. It isn't any trouble, just a It isn't any trouble, just a S-M-I-L-E. So smile with your trouble, it will dance like a bubble. If you only take the trouble, just a S-M-I-L-E. It isn't any trouble, just a P-R-A-Y. It isn't any trouble, just a P-R-A-Y. So pray when you're in trouble, it will dance like a bubble. If you only take the trouble, just a P-R-A-Y. It isn't any trouble, just an S-I-N-G-C. It isn't any trouble, just an S-I-N-G-C. So sing when you're in trouble. It will change like a bubble. If you only take the trouble, just an S-I-N-G-C. Isn't any trouble, just a W-R-K work. It isn't any trouble, just a W-R-K work. So work when you're in trouble. It will change like a bubble. If you only take the trouble, just a W-R-K work. Booster, booster, be a booster. Don't be rushed like a rooster. Booster, booster, be a booster. Booster's Bible school.
This is not exactly, but this is what your children are going to be studying about Adam's rib. And I think it's important to understand we can just see what happens, and we sometimes are left to reason from that of why it happens this way. But we see creation taking place. In this first paragraph, we lay the scene for ourselves. And I just think it shows the wisdom of God. I'm reflected upon it. I'm not determining God, that must be wise because I said so. We're the creation. But how did he establish his place as far as the beginning of all things? He's the beginning, and he has no beginning. That's hard to us to understand, but we realize that's the case. That we can imagine that here we have our atmosphere being the heavens and the earth. God created the heavens and the earth, and in everything that's in them. But God has always existed. Did God create his own universe? He's in our universe. He's not part of creation. He has his own place. What he did, he formed a universe that is apart from him, but he formed that, and we're just kind of in this little funnel. It starts with him, and outside here, eternity, not governed by time. The glory of God is what's there. And we know before the creation that angels were in existence because they saw creation and rejoiced over that. And so I picture it may be very close from this universe and from our dimension that we have. We may be in the heavenly places. It'll take a long time to get to heaven. Not necessarily. And we can be transported real well in spiritual bodies. So all of that is left to our imaginations, which is not, I'm not trying to say, well, that's the thing, but realize that there is the heavenly places where angelic beings are that just outside of our perception, our universe. That's why cosmonauts can go out in space and they didn't see God. And therefore there is no God. That's not true. And so one day, this part that we've been talking about, our universe, the planets, the stars, the heavenly places, and we read, I know there's heavenly places outside of here where the spiritual beings are, and some of them are evil. There's the angelic beings that are in the works of darkness, that's outside here, but they affect us. And one day, the earth, the heavens be gone. We will be standing before God, and we'll be able to go to a place of heaven outside of this universe. Now, some say it'll be this universe perfectly made. I don't know, it's going to be burned up. So I think of this, wisdom of God, when did he create the sun? It's got to have life. You've got to have life. I think things don't grow in my garden unless you have the sun. When was it created? First day? No. And that's our source of light. What's God telling us? I'm light. And I can create these things, but the first thing he set forth was light, and it was without the sun. What's that all about? It's to get people at this moment of time with you and me to soberly think about the fact God has his fingerprint on things. But look how wise it was. He creates the food that will feed the animals before he creates the animals and before he creates you and me. He brings forth the sun and the moon, the stars, and we have light there, and that's what we have in our universe that we live in. But he had light before that. That's something that's strange to us. It shouldn't be, because God, the glory of God is seen in creation, and the very first thing he did, he said, I got light, and it's not the sun. It's me, your creator. Did he have to argue a long time about proving who he is? In the beginning, what does it say? God. John will talk about the beginning, that Jesus Christ, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. When the beginning came, the Word already was. In that eternal space out there. Not our universe, not our places where we think of, those are the heavens. That's where things were created. But God's wisdom was, and what he did, he created the last things that are important. Last. Who was that? Man. What makes us special? We're created in what? In the image of God. The monkeys weren't, were they? Or were they? God saved that for man. Because we are created in his image. And the way God works so many times is that what was preeminent in his mind is the last thing brought to our attention. It's the last thing that in creation was created. That which was a preeminent part of his mind. That indeed, here's man, and I've already made a plan that when they sin, how it's going to be taken care of. It's the eternal purpose of God. I just want us to marvel for a moment at this idea that of God's wisdom. So if that's true, and that statement, if that is true, I can go at it all the days of my life, and I found that it's so true. Because what is the last thing in store for us? Which is the preeminent of all things? Heaven. Heaven. We'll go in the Hadean world. We'll die, and our spirits will be separated from our body. That's called death. There'll be a resurrection. It's a glorious resurrection. There'll be the burning away of this universe, and we'll stand before the judgment seat of Christ. We'll get an answer for what we've done, whether it be good or evil. And they'll be ushered into the glories of heaven. What was preeminent and first in his mind is the last to be enjoyed, experienced, or come into existence. It's the way God works. And you find me where it's not true. That when we think about things in store for us, that's why what is this? What do you and I have this very moment that the world doesn't have? They may be hopeful, they may be wishful. I hope that is true. What's your hope? What is it based upon? When we say, well, that's just my expectation, is that what the hope of the Bible is? We are certain of our expectation that it's going to be brought to be, because that is going to be our hope. Is not the time that you're spending with your children. That's important. That is in place of raising your children. We go through time and we go through the process of living and raising our children and getting older and dying, and we just keep going over again as long as God allows us to live. But what's important is that we have the hope that's lined up for us in the heavens, in heaven itself. And that's based upon Jesus' resurrection. So you have a living hope as a Christian. And that's going to be something that we still look forward to. Hope that's seen is not hope anymore. We don't hope for that which we see. We hope that which we see not. Then we with patience wait for it. We keep serving God, knowing that still lies ahead. And the point is, it's certain. The Social Security, 2035, it may be gone. They're just so scared. They probably won't do that. But you don't know. Things changed. Things that promised, they don't come through. That happens. But it doesn't happen with God. So I want us to rejoice in that. And when we study this creation, we realize there's something that God was telling us and telling mankind when we read in Genesis 2:18, the last part of this first paragraph. Everything's in place. And the animals are there, created. Who's naming the animals? Adam is. And he'll name woman. But he sure didn't create woman. But the point is that here he was having a garden to tend to, having animals to name. That's a tiger, that's a bear, that's a dog. Whatever that was taking place. The species probably didn't take very long to do that on this day when they were created. And after he was created, he named them. But of all of that, what was his problem from God's perspective? He was alone. He was alone. And we're asking the question here, question number one, with all the beautiful trees to see, and there's people say, I can spend my lifetime. I know people that are bird watchers. They know exactly what the sound of that bird is. They spend their time, and it's beautiful to see birds. Where birds are, they're in trees, and it's beautiful to look at all the trees. And I tell you, I'm not lonely when I'm out there looking at the trees. And he had the Garden of Eden. He had all the animals. I tell you, man's best friend is a what? When you're single, man's best friend is a what? You got a dog. When you get old, his best friend sometimes a dog. Life turns around. But the point is that he was alone. There was not a complement for him. Whether he knew that, understood that, don't know. But the important thing is God said it was not good to be what? To be alone. And there's some wisdom in all of that. But we see what is about to take place. So what happened in bringing forth woman? And here's where we say, well, why would we study this? Why would we study this in an adult class? Because there's a reason for what God does things, and we can look at the things that are set forth. Our question number two, what was the purpose for creating the woman? The Bible says to be a help meet. I always thought that's kind of like one word, help me. It said it, help me. Well, no, you need to at least put a hyphen there. There's a help. She was to assist the man. And he didn't create them at the same time. That becomes a very important part in the New Testament of what we'll talk about. But could he reproduce after his kind? Not now. Not at this point. Is that another reason for creating woman? And we read in the first chapter that you're to replenish the earth. And chapter 2, we look at the details of what's happening in creation. And we know that he, from the dust of the ground, he formed man, breathed in his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living soul, a living person. The woman wasn't there. God could have done them simultaneously, but he didn't. So what are we going to learn from that? Well, we're going to learn some doctrine from that in the New Testament. Who was formed first? That becomes an important part in authority from God's perspective, and therefore I cherish that. And we begin to realize that there's a purpose, but all the purpose was for companionship, to replace that dog or that bear that he thought he was a companion with. If that's what it's all about, no. It was to produce. So what did Adam call her when he named her? This now bone of my bones. Yeah, we took a rib. We didn't take from the dust of the ground, God's perspective, took a rib, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called what? Woman. And I bring forth here in the Anglo-Saxon word woman, second paragraph, helps us to see God's design. It literally means womb man. Womb man. I think we get that picture. That was the complement in order to bring about God's purpose for creating man. And here was indeed that relationship they're going to see it. And now we're looking into how do babies come, and there's the sexual relationship that's been talked about. That was a purpose. And it's so sad that in our days that's a term that's taboo. We don't want to talk about that because it's been so perverted by devil and our own fleshly lust. But it's a pure thing with God. It is an essential thing for population growth and how God wanted the world to be filled with people. And it also would form a very close relationship that no animal could replace. That's why bestiality is so horrible with God. That's in the sexual relationship. And what was she? She was a distinctive being from man, but a complement to man. And she was there to help, not rule over him, there to help and assist. And she was very suitable to him, producing children after their kind and all the things that they're doing. So God had a design, and he fulfilled it perfectly. And he could have taken from the dust to form her, but he did not do that because she was going to be part of man. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians 11? That she's the glory of man. And we see relationships so perverted, the glory of the husband, the glory of the man, the only part of that. But we're looking at it in its pure sense before men all kind of messed it up with their personalities and character and their abuses and all of those things. This is the way it was designed, and we want to look back and we want to fulfill what God had in his mind for that to take place. So here was the idea of what he said in Genesis 1, to be fruitful and multiply. And so what do we see coming from that in Genesis 2:24? When we realize that takes place, are we seeing that indeed marriage is being instituted? Do we see that in Genesis 2:24? Are we talking about marriage, or did I make that up? Or do we just assume that when we say that? What's that? Yes, that's right. And a lot of times that's just, the original language is woman, but in the context you got it right, and that's what they said there. A man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife. And they shall be what? One flesh. And so here we see that in their innocency that they had, the purity of this, they become one flesh. So what are we talking about in the Bible when we speak of one flesh? And I want to make this concrete because a lot of times in our marriage ceremonies, we make it companionship and you see your two heartbeats at one and we're so close and all of that. Okay, that's fine. But what is it in the Bible? Even in its perverted state, what is it in the Bible? It's a sexual union between the male and the female. That's what it is. You will cleave to your wife. That'll be hold close and be together. And that involves the personalities, the hearts, the desires, the plans, all of that. I'm not belittling that, but I'm not disassociating itself what it really was to fulfill part of God's plan too, and that's to produce children. and to bring children into the world. And the reason I know that is that when in the state of perversion, fornication, when people were practicing fornication in Corinth, when he says you're to flee fornication, not the sexual relationship, to flee fornication. In verse 16 he says, know ye not that he that is joined to a harlot is one body? For the twain shall he, saith he, the twain, saith he, shall become one flesh. Oh, not with a harlot. Yeah, with a harlot. You became one flesh. What was that? It's just pure sex. And that was to be reserved between a man and a woman, husband and wife. That was what was to be important there. And so one of the things that I think in our times that we have to emphasize to the people around us in the world, because they're not getting this, or I have to be thinking about that with our own life, is the sanctity of marriage. And that's our question number 3. What various ways can we respect the sanctity of marriage in our age? And I know this is thrown upon you. You haven't had time to think about it. I have. And you think about what is sanctity. It means this doesn't belong to anybody else. It's holy. And what makes it holy, first of all, did man institute it or did God? God did. It's the sanctity of it because God instituted that. Did Adam look for his wife? Or was the woman brought to him? God brought it to him. Did he say it's not good for me to be alone? Or did God say that? God said, from the very beginning, God said not good to be alone. Who did the surgery that day? God. Thankfully, put him to sleep. Wasn't painful, as far as I know. God did that. He didn't leave him out there and say, well, there's the animals. Oh, there's the woman. I guess she's from me. No, God brought him. And God said, man shall leave his father and mother. There's that relationship that's very close to, but got something closer now. Doesn't mean we forget our mother and father. But we cleave to our wife, and the twain, shall be one flesh. God is there all through the marriage relationship being set up. And yet, what do we do today? If you want to get married, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And people sometimes just living together. That's why marriages go down. So marriages breaking up and divorce. The divorce rate's going down. Yeah, you know why? A lot of times they're not even getting married. So God is being diminished out of our culture and society in so many ways. So we have to fight against that, to not be caught up in that, and realize the sanctity of it. God instituted it. Therefore, we're going to keep the relationship holy, and therefore, we're not going to go outside of marriage to satisfy those sexual desires. So what is that? It's fornication. No, they're married, so therefore it's what? We'll call it adultery. Fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. And when those two words are together, you might make a distinction. But why does he use fornication when he talks about marriage and that's the only reason you could ever divorce a mate? For fornication. We call it adultery. Why is it fornication, you think? That's right. Yeah. That's right. It's the intercourse that's taking place, and there's two women or two men, whatever that is like. And is that the culture we live in today? Is that okay with our world? With our world, it is. In a lot of places, not with you. That's good. We got to be the salt of the earth. But that's what we're having to go against, and that's what you're having to raise your children in that culture and that atmosphere. And saying, I think one of the ways we can respect the sanctity of marriage is, first of all, God instituted it. It's not first done in the courthouse. We're doing things in the courthouse, writing papers to reflect the importance of that relationship that God instituted it. And he's only given us one reason that it could ever be separated, where it allows you to marry another, would be for fornication, broad term. It would include bestiality, it would include homosexuality. And so that's why it's set broad, but we would call it, well, you went outside of marriage, but pre-sex before marriage, fornication. Adultery, well, that's between married folks, and that's true. But he used the broad term to show here is the standard for that. God doesn't want that to be interfered with. And a lot of times that will happen on the marriage night, and the sanctity of that, and you do not disturb sign. And you've got to keep that do not disturb sign in your marriage the whole time. It's that holy, and that before God. Any other reasons or any other ways we can show respect to the sanctity, the holiness of marriage? Thank you. Okay. How does the woman being formed from the rib of man affect her attitude toward her husband? To be a thorn in his flesh? What? No. I know our time is short, and I want us to. This is such a great statement, and you've heard it before. But Matthew Henry on page 2, third main paragraph down, in commenting on creation of woman as being formed from the rib of man, Matthew Henry makes the following helpful analogy, and I think this is helpful. She was not made out of his head. And here's our thought from that, as he says, to rule over him. Is that true? Wives, be in subjection to your husbands. And we can kind of visualize, well, it wasn't from the head to rule over him, nor out of his feet to be trampled on and abused by him. But where? Out of his side. God does things. Why did he create sun later in the light? He wants us to see he's the source of light. But the sense of by the side, he could have picked any bone. He does that, and I think this is true with Scripture. By his side, because he's going to be a helpmeet to him. And he's also to be equal with him. Out of his side, to be equal with him. Not under his feet, not over his head. Under his arm, to be what? Protected. And near to his heart, to be what? Be loved. I think that's just a simple analogy of how we can take that. God had a reason for that, and really it's going to be of man. Man was formed first. She's to assist the man. I know we get that, and to be in subjection to the husband as well. Now, questions 5 and 6. We'll hit them, and you're just welcome to answer this how you want to. How can we keep the godly attitude of submission from the perverted feeling of inferiority? David? It's a very great example. 1 Corinthians 11, Paul said the head of Christ is God. But he wasn't inferior. He's equal. So the side thing is true there. And but does our culture and our society allow you to have that concept in applying it to our relationships? No. If you are not making the decisions, or you're not, anytime you have to submit to someone, you're kind of inferior, because it's all about power to a people. Who's got the power? Hear me roar, women say. They want the power. And here's the orderly arrangement of a family at the very important part. Before children and while children, there's that headship, there's that authority, there's a leadership of the father, and there's the mother. She can bring forth some ideas that the man needs to understand. That's not, it doesn't mean she's not intelligent. More highly intelligent. But there's a point there, and that's what we have to deal with. Yes, sir.
There is an element of a way in which our society does see that you can be equal, but have that one of the tenets of our society, but people know that they need to be under the authority of their boss, under the authority of this person, under the authority. And they have that concept, they just don't seem to understand that it can apply to a marriage relationship.
No. I had a couple say, well, it's 50-50 with us, and their marriage broke up. And I know what they meant by it because I talked to them. But that was the idea that I'm just equal to make a decision he does, and it's a lot of times she was ruling, a lot of times. And you got to have that orderly thing, and I think that's a good analogy of what they're not willing to apply to. And then they argue, they'll say, well, you're inferior. Nobody's inferior. But there's the battle we have to find. Now, how should a husband exercise his headship in the home? He's a head, but he's not, I say here in the outline, he's not a despot. He's to not abuse her. And I think in 1 Peter 3, and I know our time is short, but just look at the man in verse 7. You dwell with your wives according to knowledge. What is that knowledge? That's being understood in the sports world with women and men today. What is that knowledge? Woman is a weaker vessel. In what way? Not inferior, but it's not as strong as the human body is deciding. What are we biologically understanding now? A male says, I am going to be a woman. And I'm going to what? I'm going to compete in the swim contest, in races. What's happening? The male body, stronger. That's a fact. That's not going to change. And God, I think God this is the way I wanted it, and now we're seeing how stupid it looks, right? How sad it is, how disruptive it is. And this is biological facts, and they're just ignoring that, and they know that, but the more they tell you, that's a woman, that's a woman, that's a woman, your children will grow up and say, yeah, that's a woman, just different. That's a woman, that's a man. And men recognize that, and they treat her, honor her, respect her. She has that place of assisting her. You don't abuse that. Yes, David? True.
Because, you don't even have to go through high school biology to know that male and female are genders, and you cannot change it by doing mutilation.
But our culture is doing it. You won't even let you walk across the stage because you believe there's two distinct sexes in college. They're forcing it. What do? We stay put, we make our points like you're doing, we come back to God and realize that will stand, and this other's going to crumble. It will crumble. And we just wait for that. The woman in 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6, is she married to a Christian or a non-Christian? In 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6. He's not a Christian. So what does she do? Well, she's realized that that's my husband, and does she show the sanctity of marriage? Beholding your chaste behavior coupled with reverence and fear. This is what we've been talking about. Chaste and reverential submission. Don't let it be the adorning of the braided hair, the outward adorning, but more importantly is the point. Let it be the hidden man of the heart in an incorruptible apparel of a what? Meek, I'm bringing myself under control, and a quiet spirit. It's not that I don't speak. Is that I'm happy with that relationship because it's from God. I'm quiet. I'm not in it's not torturous and having to submit to him and that sort of thing. And we have to, but there's that meek and quiet spirit. He's not even a Christian. And needs to manifest that. And that's the way that while he may not be won right now by the word, it's what he says, and wordiness that says, this is what you ought to do, you do this, do that. He's watching how you create the sanctity of marriage in your heart, in your life, and he can be won over because he sees that great example. You're going to do that anyway. That's the way you are as a wife. And it applies to a Christian, and it applies to non-Christians, it applies to marriage. And that's what I wanted to make sure we we understand there, and through that, he may be able to be won over by that character of the woman and the character of the man who doesn't abuse that authority, but considers their well-being, just like Christ. He loved us. He gave himself up for us. And he nourishes and cherishes that which is part of his body. And that's the wife. And I think we probably have to stop there. But if you have a comment, let me see your hands. Feel free to speak up. So the last paragraph, I think, we're kind of close together. Let us honor the sanctity of marriage by never forgetting that God instituted it and his word governs it. Let us teach our girls in submitting to their husbands as honoring the fact that the woman was created for what? For the glory of man. Please respect that. Let us teach our boys that headship is not being a dictator, but is being respectful, tender, self-sacrificing provider for the well-being of his honored wife. Every one of those words means something. Bones initially coming together created the institution of marriage. And I hope you'll join me. May we honor what God has joined together and teach our children to do so as well. Thank you.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First and Second Samuel, First Kings, Leviticus, First and Second Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Joseph, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Haggai, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and the last book is Malachi. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Exodus, Romans, First and Second Corinthians, Galatians and Ephesians, Leviticus, Colossians, First and Second Thessalonians, First and Second Timothy, Titus and Philemon, Hebrews is the book of James, First and Second Peter, First and Second and Third John, Jude and Revelation. Timothy read the scroll and I read the Bible. Timothy read the scroll and I read the Bible. Timothy read the scroll and I read the Bible. They are both God's Word. The Bible, oh that's the book for me. I stand with Christ on the Word of God. The Bible, oh that's the book for me. I love to hear the stories from the B-I-B-L-E. The B-I-B-L-E. Oh, that's the book for me. I'll read and study in the rain. The B-I-B-L-E. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. Jesus loves me. He who died, heaven's gate to open wide. He will wash away my sin. Let his little child come in. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me, the Bible tells me so. Jesus, take this heart of mine, make it pure and holy mine. Thou hast bled and died for me, I will henceforth live for thee. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me, the Bible tells me so. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, shine, shine. shine all the time. Never let the devil poof it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Never let the devil poof it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Never let the devil poof it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, shine, shine all the time. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, shine, shine all the time. All around the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. Shine all over the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. Shine all over the neighborhood, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, shine, shine all the time. A little bigger now. Shine all over Texas, I'm gonna let it shine. A big now. Shine all over Texas, I'm gonna let it shine. Go south now. Shine all over Texas, way over. Let it shine, shine, shine all the time. Let it shine till Jesus comes, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine till Jesus comes, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine till Jesus comes, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine.